Responding to Jesse's indictments against Calvinism, he has 20 indictments against Calvinism and arguments against certain points from the Calvinist systematic theology, at least focusing on the soteriology of Calvinism, or what is sometimes called tulip. And this is the 8th indictment which he gives, and it's on what he calls the sinful nature idea. And this is his claim that the sinful nature idea of Calvinism gives sinners an excuse for their sin, and therefore it justifies their sin. And the reason he's saying so is because if the sinful nature given to a person, if it's not their fault that they have a sinful nature, then every sin that they commit from that nature is not their fault either, because they're compelled to do so. So let's look at his exact argument here. He says, if we have a sinful nature that makes us sin, then we have an excuse before God on Judgment Day. Now notice this isn't a syllogism. It does beg the question. It's missing a middle term. So it's not even an argument. It's just if A, then B. But he hasn't demonstrated that B equals A. So basically what he's also saying logically is that if sinning comes not from nature, then there is no excuse. Now what does it mean for sin to come not from a person's nature? And we're going to look at whether Jesse's own theology is actually consistent with what he's given. And I think the way he would solve this, from considering his videos and considering his teachings on the subject, is that free will is the basis from which our actions come from. Actually, I know that for certain because I've had a little bit of a discussion with him on these themes. The question, therefore, is what conditions a person's behavior? And, of course, if Jesse advocated a hyper-libertarian free will, that would mean that there are no conditions for behavior, and that behavior is less arbitrary. So he can't hold that position, because then that would make a person not culpable. If it's completely arbitrary and without any kind of direct influence from the person, or the person having some kind of volunteering, absolute, effective decision when a person makes a choice or not. So it can't be just free from all sorts of conditions. Behavior would just be spontaneous. The person would be choosing good and evil and contrary decisions without any kind of premeditation or any kind of determining force from the person's own character or who they are. They wouldn't be the one that are choosing or not. Free will would just be this sort of mechanism that a person has that makes them act in a certain way. So that would also fit the same way that the Calvinists would define nature, because it would be a sort of compulsion that makes them do something. But of course Jesse doesn't advocate that. Of course, I've seen from his friend Kerrigan Skelly define how, or at least describe how free will works, and why is it true that all people sin or have sinned in the past. Why is it true? It's because they are at a state of accountability where they are able to decide good from evil. They have the capacity to do so, but then they are tempted, and then they make an evil choice from that temptation. So there are influences and conditions that are external to a person, a sort of reciprocal determinism that actually makes them choose what choice they do, and it's not based on their nature at all. Even though their nature, inherent in them, they have the knowledge of good and evil, they have conscience and so forth, and we'll see how that's integral to Jesse's position, and we'll see whether that's merited or whether that's actually consistent with his argument here. So basically, if Jesse isn't a hyper-libertarian free willist, he advocates that behavior is an inherent moral faculty, and it independently decides between all sorts of spectrums of possible or potential behaviors, that is, good choices and evil choices and everything in between, if there is such a thing. But according to Jesse's position, behavior would be a premeditated action. That is, the free will would be the faculty that allows a person to morally decide between different positions or not, or different choices. So then the free will faculty is therefore conditioned by the person and determined by that person, and also is conditioned by their environmental influences such as temptation, because temptation would come from the devil, of course. So there's a reciprocal determinism of influence here, and basically if volition supersedes temptation. Basically, according to Jesse, we could assume that this is his position, that a person's volition is greater than the temptation, because then it would be truly a person wouldn't have free will, but they would also be conditioned by exterior forces like temptations and stuff, which that would be partially true according to Jesse's libertarian free willism. So we're going to see that volition, according to his position, is actually supersedes any kind of external force or conditions or environmental factors, biological makeup, and so forth. Because his argument is that a person's free will is not the same thing as a person's nature, and he has to demonstrate also that free will is not part of a person's nature, even though he describes it that way, that it's inherent in a person. And we're going to look at whether a person chooses their character based on this free will or not. Because how can you choose free will, or how can you choose what your character is with free will if your free will is the function of your character? Now, we can agree that volition does supersede temptation according to Jesse's system. But where does volition come from? And what then is character? When we talk about volition, a person who makes a choice based on their free will, this inherent moral faculty, what causes them to decide between the good and the evil? Basically, how do you choose the character that would define what choice you make? Because according to Jesse's system, character is defined by what choices you make. That would make you either a good person or a bad person. You're basically, according to Jesse's system, you're in charge of choosing what kind of character you're going to be, and what kind of character you are, as a result, will determine whether you choose a good choice or a bad choice. So how do you choose the character if your free will is the function of a person's character? How do you choose what kind of character you are? And this will make sense in a moment, because I had a discourse with Jesse on this very subject, and this will be basically clear up any kind of accusation of me of making a straw man against Jesse, because I'll quote his actual arguments that he gave to me on this position. So basically, what is the answer to this paradox according to Jesse? We have to note that according to Jesse's system, when I look at his arguments and when I look at his open-air preaching, when I look at his videos and his system, we see that knowledge is integral to his system, or at least knowledge of sin that is revealed outside of the law. A person has an innate moral faculty that gives them the knowledge of what is good and what is evil, and this doesn't happen at birth. This is something, this sort of cognition is developed as a person matures in life, and usually it's at a very early age, normally at their youth. There is no set age of accountability, but there is a state of accountability in which a person matures into, according to Jesse's system. Now, what is that called? He calls that conscience. And we're going to see whether the person's conscience actually, if this actually helps this paradox at all. Because basically, if all know what is right and wrong, then knowledge determines what a person's character is. And then we could also, from that, say that all you have to do is not be knowledgeable according to what is good and evil. Basically, stop teaching what the law says, stop going and doing open-air preaching, because if a person never hears the gospel, then they can't be held accountable for not repenting and absorbing or repenting by their own volition and accepting the gospel or accepting Jesus by their own power and free will. So we'd have to stop all that. We'd have to basically burn all the Torahs, eliminate God's revelation to mankind. Now, of course, this is an absurd position, and I know, in fact, that Jesse would deny that that's what his position is. So let's look at the alternative here. If that's unsatisfactory, we would say that knowledge is thus a universal moral faculty that's innate within a person.